This video is not directed at kids, it is intended for a mature audience only, and may contain the use of curse words. No children under the age of 13 should watch this video. So today folks, I thought I would sit down and rank all 10 episodes of classic Doctor Who Season 3. And if you're not familiar with how I do this, then I just want to warn you, this is entirely my opinion. These rankings are not going to line up with yours, and that's totally fine as long as we're both having fun. Also, fair spoiler warning for the season of Doctor Who. If you don't want any spoilers at all, then feel free to check out now. But if you're going to stick with me, then let's start by ranking all 10 episodes of Season 3 of classic Doctor Who. The Gunfighters I just found to be the least interesting episode this season. There was some bad music, and there was some just uninteresting stuff. They just kind of meandered, and there was some elements that kind of worked with the cast, but overall this results in just a really unmemorable episode that I don't have much to say about. Galaxy 4 starts off this season in a rather weak way. It's not much better than the previous entry. There's some stuff that kind of works, there's some stuff that doesn't. I guess this one actually is partially missing, although that's something I tend to forget because I tend not to remember this episode particularly well because there's not particularly much to remember about this episode, sadly. It exists. It is an episode, but I can't tell you very much about it. But I can tell you it had a little bit more going on that interested me than the previous episode, and there was a little that worked a little better, but there's not much in this one, guys. The Savages is admittedly a slight step up, although I should note that is very slight. This episode just is a little bit more interesting and just is a little bit... There's just a little bit more in this one to kind of care about, but also you can't care that much. There's just very little to really remember about this one. It kind of has the same problems that a lot of these bottom episodes have, is that there's just very little that I can remember about it, although it does exist, and sadly it is a missing episode, but it's not a particularly good missing episode. This episode is pretty good. It's also not particularly memorable, but at least it's trying a little bit more than the previous episodes and results in a little bit more entertainment out of it. The first part is the best one of these four, but not by a lot. This episode doesn't really do a lot to distinguish itself from similar stories, and it's ultimately not that memorable, and there's stuff that doesn't work. The war machines aren't great, but ultimately, you know, it's pretty good. It's rather enjoyable on the first watch, and it's not bad. I can at least say that. The Massacre is very similar in quality to the previous episode. It's a pretty good episode that doesn't have a lot to remember, but what puts this one over the previous entry for me is there is a final moment where the Doctor thinks about his place in the universe and where he is in his life, and there's this great moment from William Hartnell that really was unexpected and completely surprised me, and I really enjoyed it and was glad I saw it in such a unimportant episode, just this random episode, and this great moment was there, and that was what puts this one a little bit over the previous entry for me. The Myth Makers is a little bit of a better episode, but what really is my biggest problem with this episode is how it exits Vicky from the show. That was incredibly disappointing to me, and it was such a really, I thought, a poor way to exit a pretty solid character. And the rest of the episode is pretty fine. You know, it works well, it plays well. It's not a bad episode. It's an enjoyable one, and I did enjoy it, even though it isn't tragically a missing episode. But this one really did, unfortunately, fumble her exit. But it still ranks above the previous ones just because it's more consistent. The Ark is a rather enjoyable small-scale story that I had fun with. This is a pretty short episode at 4 parts, and they managed to kind of mix things up by having it take place in a couple of different time periods. So we spent a couple of episodes at one point in time and then the next couple in a different point, and that managed to make things feel a little bit less stale and mix things up a little bit more and make things a little more interesting than they probably should have been for this kind of a story, and things all worked out all right, and it ended up being entertaining, and there's not much more that I can say about it. It was relatively entertaining. There's not a lot of meat in this episode, though, and yeah, ultimately it's pretty good. The Celestial Toymaker doesn't fully work for me, but this is an episode where I just found its concepts to be good enough that they kind of carried the episode a good amount, and I just found myself really enjoying this dynamic between the Doctor and the Celestial Toymaker, and it just wound wound up being a enjoyable episode, and it doesn't quite fully come together to make a really strong story, but it's so close to doing that, and there's elements that just don't quite work, but ultimately what it results in is a fun episode that could have been improved, but I had some entertainment and enjoyment from nonetheless. Mission to the Unknown takes us into what I can safely call the good episodes. This episode is only one part long, but this is a really solid episode. This is a very missing episode, tragically, but also a rather engaging one, and the stuff that goes on in here is creepy, and I would have loved to have seen it play out on screen, although I don't know if it would have been as effective had I been able to visually see it, but just hearing this episode was really good, and it was just a solid episode that worked really well. It was a tight story that did not have the Doctor or the companions at all, but just worked regardless by itself, and that is a testament to the strengths of this 25-minute story, which wound up somehow being the second best episode of this whole season, and yeah, it was solid. The Daleks' master plan makes it to the top of this ranking because it's just really good. I mean, this episode somehow manages to stay good throughout the whole thing. The weakest one is the Christmas episode, which isn't bad. It's pretty good. It's not perfect, but the rest of it is just quite solid, and episode 4 was great. That death was really surprising to me. I did not see that coming. That was really well executed, and that was a fantastic episode. And the very last episode, I really wish I could actually see, because it just visualizing that in my mind while listening to the audio was I just loved it. And if there was one episode of classic Doctor Who that I could see, then it would probably be the last part of this episode. And sadly, this is a mostly missing episode, but it still holds up really well, only mostly on audio format, and this is just a really engaging episode, a 12-part epic that is just really solid. And it's not one of the best episodes of Classic Who, but it is a really solid one nonetheless, and an episode that I'm going to remember as one that I am very thankful that I have seen, and definitely living up to the legacy of the Daleks. So that's going to do it for today, folks. This brings us to the end of this ranking, and if you have your own ranking of Season 3 of Classic Doctor Who, feel free to share that down below. I would be happy to strike up a conversation. If not, maybe share some of your favorite, least favorites, whatever you feel like doing. I would be happy to talk with you. And that's about it. I have many Classic Doctor Who videos so far, some rankings, some season reviews, episode-by-episode reviews, Series 11 reviews, all that fun stuff. Lots if you're interested in it. And if not, that's totally fine. I just appreciate your time here today. So, that's all I have to say for now, folks. Thank you for watching. Take care, and have a lovely week.